The Caribbean night was calm, deceptively serene. At precisely 2:47 a.m. on November 9, 2025, 18 nautical miles off the coast of Venezuela, USCGC Stone, a 418-foot national security cutter, glided through the inky black waters, its radar clear, engine steady, and crew on normal watch. The mission was routine: counter-narcotics patrol, interdicting illicit trafficking routes that funneled billions of dollars in cocaine and heroin northward to the United States. Everything was proceeding according to protocol, with the professionalism and discipline that define every American maritime operation. But in the shadow of Venezuela's increasingly erratic military posture, the night was about to erupt in a lesson in miscalculation, overconfidence, and the unyielding precision of U.S. military response. Then, without warning, green tracer rounds arced across the water, illuminating the darkness in deadly streaks. The first thought among the Stone crew was disbelief. This was not a warning shot, not harassment, not a distant display of force. This was a Venezuelan patrol boat opening fire on a United States vessel, in international waters, in violation of every established norm. The captain's voice cut through the sudden chaos. All hands, battle stations. Return fire authorized. In an instant, a routine patrol had become a combat scenario, a stark reminder of the thin line between provocation and war. Venezuela's provocations in the Caribbean were not unprecedented, yet they had never crossed the line into lethal engagement. For years, the Maduro regime had asserted claims to an extended security zone well beyond recognized territorial waters, a legal fiction used to intimidate foreign vessels. Venezuelan patrol boats had routinely harassed fishing operations, issued threats to commercial ships, and confronted U.S. patrols with aggressive maneuvers and radio warnings. Still, a firing incident had never occurred. Domestically, these acts of harassment were leveraged for political gain, presenting Maduro as the vigilant defender of Venezuelan sovereignty, a leader standing up to the imperialist threat of the United States. But the decision to fire on Stone represented a catastrophic misjudgment, a reckless overreach that violated the norms of international maritime law and exposed Venezuela to immediate and overwhelming consequences. The combination of internal political pressure, a young and ambitious patrol officer, and a gross misreading of American resolve set the stage for what would quickly become a textbook example of strategic error. At 2:47 a.m., the sequence of events unfolded with stark clarity. A Guaycari-class Venezuelan patrol boat, approximately 125 feet long and armed with 14.5 mm and 12.7 mm machine guns, approached at 30 knots, closing the distance with alarming speed. Attempts by Stone to hail the approaching vessel over radio went unanswered. Visual signals, repeated and precise, were ignored. Then, with no further warning, the first bursts of gunfire erupted. The tracer rounds leapt across the water, each green arc a deadly signal of intent. The Stone crew immediately recognized the gravity of the situation. Hostile action had commenced. Alarms blared throughout the cutter, and sailors sprinted to their stations. Every action, from gripping weapons to coordinating fire control, was executed with a level of professionalism forged by years of disciplined training. In the span of seconds, what had been a routine patrol became a live engagement, a direct confrontation with a foreign military force. The initial U.S. response was measured but decisive. Weapons free was called, and the Mk1 10-57mm gun, along with 2.50 caliber machine guns, were brought to bear. The first 57mm round splashed short, a warning in itself. Adjustments were made with precision, calibrating trajectory and distance. The next round landed directly in front of the Venezuelan patrol boat, erupting a massive geyser of water that served both as a warning and as a demonstration of American firepower. A third round found its mark on the bow, producing an orange flash and thick smoke as the forward gun of the Venezuelan vessel was silenced. Despite this, the Venezuelan patrol continued to fire, turning its stern guns toward Stone. Rounds skipped across the water, some striking the hull, scraping paint, but causing no penetration. Throughout, Stone maintained composure, its crew executing return fire with a blend of aggression and control that conveyed both capability and restraint. The 57mm rounds found their targets, disabling weapons and superstructure on the Venezuelan vessel. Smoke poured from the patrol boat as the Americans maintained a tactical advantage, forcing the aggressor into retreat. The engagement, though brief in duration, starkly highlighted the disparity between disciplined, professional execution and impulsive, politically motivated aggression. Amidst the chaos, Stone activated secure communications with U.S. Southern Command. The message was succinct: hostile vessel engaged, fire returned, hull damage minimal, no casualties, vessel combat effective. Within moments, the response was clear: confirmation of unprovoked attack and immediate dispatch of reinforcements. USS Gravely and USS Porter, both Arleigh Burke-class destroyers armed to the teeth, were 40 nautical miles to the south. Orders were issued: proceed at flank speed, weapons free against any hostile Venezuelan vessel. Engines roared, achieving speeds in excess of 32 knots, as the two destroyers cut through the Caribbean night like twin steel predators responding to a threat. The Venezuelan patrol boat, wounded and trailing smoke, raced toward territorial waters in a desperate attempt to escape. Communications from the vessel's captain reflected panic and disbelief. The first shots meant war, yet they had been unprepared for the disciplined and overwhelming response. By 2:58 a.m., 11 minutes after the first shots, the patrol boat crossed into Venezuelan territorial waters, safe for the moment, but irrevocably exposed and embarrassed. The strategic positioning of Gravely and Porter transformed the theater instantly. By 3:14 a.m., radar screens on Stone registered the approach of the two destroyers. Their massive steel hulls, powerful engines, and integrated weapons systems created an imposing barrier, effectively shielding Stone from any further Venezuelan aggression. From Caracas, the sight of American destroyers visible off the coast produced immediate chaos. The leadership scrambled to comprehend the scope of the miscalculation. What had been intended as a show of force had become a tactical disaster. U.S. communications were unambiguous: any additional hostile action would meet with overwhelming force. The psychological impact of the sudden arrival of two destroyers, each displacing thousands of tons and capable of unleashing an array of missiles, naval guns, and aircraft support, sent a clear message about the consequences of engaging U.S. forces in international waters. As the first light of dawn threatened to pierce the horizon, the tension remained tangible, a silent standoff between American precision and Venezuelan panic. The patrol boat that had opened fire on USCGC Stone was limping home, its crew shaken, its weapon systems compromised. Communications with Venezuelan headquarters were frantic, disjointed, and laden with disbelief. "What did you do? You just started a war," the commanding officers in Caracas reportedly shouted over the radio, struggling to process the reality that a single rash decision had exposed both tactical incompetence and political recklessness. By 2:58 a.m., the patrol boat crossed back into Venezuelan territorial waters, temporarily safe, but the damage had been done. The message was unmistakable, the humiliation complete, and the lesson immediate. Meanwhile, USS Gravely and USS Porter closed the gap, appearing like twin behemoths on radar screens, their immense presence both a shield for Stone and a warning to any further aggression. By 3:14 a.m., their positioning had effectively cordoned off the American cutter from any threat, creating an unassailable buffer of steel and firepower. For Venezuela, witnessing the destroyer's approach, visibility at approximately 12 nautical miles from the coast, the psychological effect was devastating. What had been a bold attempt to project power was met not with confusion or hesitation, but with disciplined, overwhelming capability. The U.S. forces had responded proportionally yet decisively, demonstrating that any breach of international norms would not be tolerated. Gravely communicated with Stone, "We have the watch. Withdraw for repairs." Stone complied, understanding the tactical advantage was now firmly in American hands. Porter blocked the northern approach, the two destroyers forming a barrier that was both literal and symbolic, a visual embodiment of the cost of Venezuela's miscalculation. The political fallout in Caracas was immediate and intense. Venezuelan officials demanded that the United States withdraw from international waters, a request promptly refused with unwavering clarity. For 4 hours, the situation remained tense, the destroyers maintaining their positions, visible, armed, and entirely in control. By dawn, news of the incident had spread worldwide. The Pentagon publicly confirmed that a U.S. Coast Guard cutter in international waters had been fired upon by a Venezuelan patrol boat. Stone had returned fire in self-defense. The hostile vessel had withdrawn. NATO and the Organization of American States, OAS, issued statements supporting the United States position. Venezuela's explanation, that the engagement was a mistake, that the American cutter had been misidentified as a smuggling vessel, was met with skepticism. The ship had been massive, well-lit, and clearly marked. No competent officer could have confused it. The young Venezuelan officer responsible was swiftly arrested. His career effectively ended. The U.S. Navy destroyers maintained pressure off the Venezuelan coast for 3 days, an unmistakable demonstration that the United States would defend its vessels and personnel without compromise. Stone itself sustained only light damage, no casualties, and returned to counter-narcotics operations within a week. The message sent by the U.S. response was permanent and unequivocal. Harassment may be tolerated, disputes may be logged, complaints may be made, but the moment a Venezuelan vessel fired on an American ship, even once, the response would be overwhelming and immediate. This was a textbook example of escalation control, disciplined response, and strategic messaging, illustrating the professional difference between a global military power and a regional actor acting impulsively. The broader lesson for Venezuela and for the world was stark. For years, the Venezuelan Navy had engaged in provocative maneuvers, testing boundaries, and attempting to assert influence in regional waters. Harassment had been tolerated, threatening maneuvers had been recorded, and close calls had passed without incident. But the moment the red line was crossed, live fire against a U.S. vessel, the consequences were instantaneous and comprehensive. The political motivations that had driven the young officer to act, internal propaganda, desire for personal glory, and a belief that the United States would respond with softness as it allegedly had to Russia, China, or North Korea, were brutally exposed as strategic miscalculations. The United States had demonstrated that a single unauthorized act of aggression would trigger a disciplined, overwhelming response from both Coast Guard and Navy, combining legal justification with unassailable military capability. In the wake of the incident, Venezuelan rhetoric cooled. Public statements shifted from bravado to cautious diplomacy. The combination of a wounded patrol boat, a detained officer, and 2 destroyers visible off the coast for days had a lasting effect on Venezuelan naval behavior. No further provocations occurred. Patrol boats maintained distance, and internal discussions in Caracas acknowledged the misstep. For U.S. forces, Stone resumed routine operations, confident in its own procedures and in the assurance that American firepower and strategic discipline had been clearly communicated. The incident became a definitive teaching moment. The U.S. Coast Guard and Navy operate with a blend of professionalism, strategic patience, and overwhelming capability that leaves no room for misjudgment by potential aggressors. As night fell again over the Caribbean, the waters returned to their deceptive calm. Somewhere along the coastline, a Coast Guard cutter patrolled with the same quiet diligence as always. Somewhere else, a Venezuelan officer, recalling the green tracers and the deadly precision of the Mk-110 57mm, the controlled return fire, and the subsequent appearance of 2 destroyers, would remember one clear fact: such recklessness could never be repeated. One impulsive act had nearly escalated to full-scale conflict. One disciplined response had maintained international law and demonstrated overwhelming American power. The consequences, the humiliation, and the strategic clarity of that morning would resonate in Venezuelan military and political circles for years to come. The red line had been drawn in vivid, unforgettable detail, and the lesson was as simple as it was profound. In international waters against the United States, mistakes are neither tolerated nor forgotten. Finally, the story concludes with a reflection on leadership under fire. The men and women aboard Stone had executed their duties with professional precision, following protocol, maintaining discipline, and responding decisively. The United States had reinforced the principle that its personnel are protected, its legal rights are enforced, and its military response is measured yet unyielding. For viewers, analysts, and military strategists alike, the episode served as a vivid case study in escalation, deterrence, and the stark contrast between impulsive aggression and controlled, overwhelming force. And for every observer, the closing question remains compelling. If you were the commanding officer aboard USCGC Stone that night, faced with tracer rounds in the dark and a fast-approaching patrol boat, would you shoot back immediately, or would you attempt to de-escalate? The answer, as history shows, comes with profound consequences.